All right. Hey Ray, how's it going?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
Ramin, I'm sorry. Which is an
I
interesting.
was wondering, do I call you Michael or Mike? Because I'm
Mike
used
is
to
fine.
Mike is
And
fine.
that your name is an interesting question. I think maybe I'll get to that, but let me just back up. So this is my podcast, and if anybody's listened to my podcast before, it's been my buddy, me and Rob. And right now our schedules aren't working out, so don't worry, Rob and I will be back. But in the meantime, I have all these people in my life that I think are super interesting people that I want to talk to. So that's exactly what I'm doing. And one of the first people I want to talk to is literally my oldest friend in the world, Rameen Zahed. How you doing? How you doing, Rameen?
I'm doing well. It still kind of trips me out a little bit that you and I have known each other since kindergarten.
Right, and it's not only has it been since kindergarten, it's been sort of this tapestry of weaving in and out of each other's life. It's not like we went to the same high school. We haven't known each other or been in the same vicinity for all that time, but that's when it all started.
Yeah, I think obviously social media has helped bring people back together that way. I think for me, it probably goes back to 9/11 when I felt the country was under attack, and I felt like I had a nostalgic turn, and I wanted to reach back and find people in my life, and I think Facebook allowed me to do that, and social media.
Hmm.
But just learning more about myself and accepting things about my past to help me become a better person in the future. But yeah, I mean, for the longest time, like I didn't know if I ever wanted to talk to anybody from Holland again. I just, it was. I don't know about you, but for me, it wasn't exactly a happy place growing up.
Um, yeah, I think no, for me it's a little different. If I had, I would say some of the more unhappy times in my life was that right period right after you leave. I left Holland, so it held, I think, a little bit more for me. Also, like my parents, I don't know, it's a little hard to say because my parents moved away from Holland and then they moved back to Holland full time maybe 6, 7 years ago, and so Holland has a completely different meaning to me now. Uh, Holland, Michigan. By the way, we grew up in Holland, Michigan, and so it has a different meaning to me now, I think, than when I was a kid. And so, um, I also, when I was younger, I just kind of, and I still do, but I've had a very Pollyanna look at life. So I didn't think about things about, I don't know. I never had anything to be unhappy about. I had a sort of this just sort of my wife calls it a precious moments kind of life growing up. So I don't know. But why would you want, I know it's reaching back, but why is there this you want to disassociate yourself with that for a while?
Well, Holland almost broke me, and during the hostage crisis in '77, I think it was '77, '79. I had up to that point not known I was anything other than an American. But at
Mhm.
that point, I suddenly got felt a tremendous amount of discrimination. It impacted my family life. It impacted our livelihood. My dad lost patience. He turned kind of bitter, and that kind of turned inward for the family. Then it's also around the time that you and I were going through puberty, so it means like you got all these different hormonal issues going on that get wrapped up into emotions. Then dealing with an immigrant father who doesn't really understand the dynamics of growing up in small town America, and then at that age, we're all very narrow minded at that age. We can only see our own problems,
Mhm.
and um, I felt a tremendous amount of discrimination, and a lot of it was real. I mean, I'm not saying it wasn't. You know, I I remember being one of the better athletes, but never allowed to be a captain. I remember um, people trying to beat me up and chase me through neighborhoods, Wakazu Woods. I remember people calling me the N word. Some of our classmates. I remember people telling me to go back to where I came from, which was weird because I was born in Detroit.
Well, if you can give me a car ride, sure, I'll head on over.
Well, and the first immigrant to this country in my family came to Holland, Michigan in 1847. And his name was Joseph Plank. And he's got quite a storied legacy. So, I mean, reality is I have a very strong birthright to Holland in some ways more than people that we grew up with.
Mhm.
But then my big goal was to get the hell out of there. I thought I could do it using sports, getting a football scholarship. And then it was, I did go to Michigan Tech, but then I got a little too involved in the fraternity scene and had to come back. And then I
Right.
went to Hope College, which even though it's in Holland, is really not part of the campus. I mean, really not part of the Holland community. It just doesn't
No.
integrate well. And but I worked in Holland, and then as I became a religion major and then I went to go to seminary, I intentionally picked New York City and the seminary I went to be as far away as possible. And I
Mm.
didn't ever want to come back. I really I felt really bruised and damaged. And I wanted to be around people who I felt like I wanted to be in a diverse community. I wanted to be in a place where people don't look in your cars when you drive by.
Right.
I wanted to be anonymous. Yeah.
No, I get it.
And kind of build a name for myself outside of this. You know.
So, just for some context, your heritage is Iranian. Um,
On my dad's side,
on
I'm
your
Dutch
dad's
Swedish on my mom's.
Dutch Swedes on your mom's side, and so we grew up in Holland, Michigan. Um, and you went to seminary school, and then sort of many years later, when we connected, you were working in finance. Um, for quite a
Yeah.
while, and then this is a very and we reconnected even closer because I had cancer and you were a cancer survivor, and that's
Right.
when sort of like our souls kind of reconnected. Although, yeah, and then and then recently you've decided to, or you've moved to become back into the ministry, to become to work within the ministry again. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the arc of my story is not a straight line.
No, and that's a very quick uh, description for someone who's 52, 51, or 52 years old. But just contextually, so just under because I think when I first messaged you the other day, I was like, I want to talk about how you went from that place to now you've rededicated yourself to the ministry. And then your response was, I was actually kind of expecting. He's like, well, like you're like, no, but you and I could just talk, because I don't want this to be all about myself. So, um, which I love.
Um,
But anyway, go
yeah,
ahead.
because I mean, I'm not going to have these opportunities to talk to you very much, and
Yeah,
I want to hear your journey through cancer and how it's changed you. And
yeah.
I know things have become more important to you that have were less important in the past.
Oh, for sure.
And
Yeah, I think when you go through something like that, and obviously you can relate, it's hard to explain how you can say the perspective changes, but unless you kind of go through it, it's hard to really relate to how your perspective on everything changes when you go through something like that.
yeah, if I think people have many inflection points in their life, and I
Mhm.
think obviously you and I both one critical one was having cancer, and we have talked, and I think it was I want to say it's either Grand Haven or Holland. We had a restaurant. That was the first time I'd seen you since a previous bike ride I'd done.
Yeah,
Um,
I think was it before I had cancer and we saw each other in
it was
Holland?
during it.
It was
You were going
during.
through your treatments,
That's right.
yeah. And I was just really impressed with how optimistic you were and how you maintain that. And part of me wonders, like looking back, did you realize? I know you look at the world through rose-colored lenses, but did you realize at the time that like the gravity of it all? Or I mean, because you kind of had a very different perspective on going through this than other people.
Um, so what I would say is a few years before that, 2 or 3 years before that, I think 2 years before that, I had a brain aneurysm, and I had to have brain surgery. And
I remember
so,
that too.
yeah, so I feel like that's where I got my confrontation with the possibility of death out of the way, if that makes sense. I mean, I dealt with those emotions before because I one day I had this insane headache. It didn't make any sense to me. So I'm like, I was on my way to do something. I'm like, I think I should go to emergency because I was lifting a bunch of boxes. I was doing a lot of heavy work around the house, and my blood pressure was elevated just because I'm working. And I got this flashbang headache, and I was like, I never had anything like that before. It was very unique. So I went to the hospital, um, and and within an hour, they're like, well, you have a brain aneurysm, and we're gonna admit you to the hospital. So what ended up happening is it wasn't I was able to go home for a couple months before the surgery, but there was a lot of soul searching at that point in my life, like right after that happened. And yeah, so I sort of confronted death then. I don't know how better way to explain it. And so that kind of prepared me when we came to the cancer thing, you know? And that was such a the way that it all came down was so bizarre that you almost like the first part of it, you're experiencing a movie from the outside and kind of watching it happen.
Yeah, it's very external to you. I remember that as well. I think part of that is the chemo because you have this fog and you just sort of you go through the rituals of what you have to do on a daily basis because that's all you really can do.
Yeah,
And in those moments, if you have something that kind of makes you appreciate reality more, it really energizes you. But there's always a sense of dread when you get that. You go up to the next chemo treatment
yeah, for
because
sure.
you know the side effects. I mean, it's going to wipe you out for 3 days. And
Hmm.
I mean, did you ever experience that sense of dread going to chemo toward the end?
Yeah, yeah, all the time. Mine was because I had leukemia, that type of cancer. It was through an IV. And so I just, yeah, I at the end, I think they're having problem getting a pick line to stay in me. So
Yeah.
so at the end, I'm just getting poked 5 days a week. And and mine was I go, yeah. So all of it, all of it. It's funny how quickly it becomes a job. It just happens to be a job for survival, but it really does feel like it was a job. I had a certain
Yeah.
schedule. My medications weren't. I had two different types, and they weren't on the same schedule. So I had, it was like a job. And so when the idea that you have cancer and then you don't die right away, right? Like, oh, I'm still alive and I have cancer a couple weeks in here, and um, the shock of it wears away. And what people don't get to experience as much as or see as much as just the grind of it all. It is a hell of a grind to get through it. And you don't know what's going to happen on the other end. So that's a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, I think trying to live with sort of this like you call it like living with a death sentence, like as it could be
Right.
you could be commuted and that the psychologically it's really tough. And then there are very few people who understand what a cancer patient goes through other than cancer patients.
Hmm.
And so for me, I had that community because people I worked with, to them it was like, okay, you're sick, you have a flu, but then it's they're pushing it away, right? They don't know.
Yeah.
And then when you go through all the treatments, I had quite a few surgeries, and one of them I was literally almost died on, right after I got surgery, and it was just really one of these things where you're like, people don't know the trauma you've been through,
Hmm.
and you go back into the workforce, you go back to everyday life, and they feel like, oh well, it's just like you had a cold, and it's not that
Mm.
way. Like this really, it is an inflection point. It's
Yeah.
very serious, and until they get it or someone they love has it, then they see it, and I think that for me was the hardest part was dealing with the fact that people felt like, okay, because I had 2 days off every bi-weekly or bi-monthly
Hmm.
to do my cancer treatments. They felt that I was, as soon as I got done with my chemo, oh, I'm just fine. I had all this vacation. I'm like, hey, it wasn't my vacation. It was
Yeah,
really brutal.
for
Um,
sure. And yeah, I was out for almost 6 months. I didn't work at all. And then so I was basically fully recovered by the time I went back to work. I got through my treatment and with leukemia, and then we did a bone marrow test, and that's the real one.
yeah,
30 whatever it was, 30 days after your final chemotherapy, and it was fine. So I didn't go. So I felt I was back to really good health by the time I went back to work, physically. But I mean, I quietly struggled in my job for a year and a half because of just all of it. Um, there's a constant thing in the back of your head, and I think, well, for me there was, and you just, I had the brain aneurysm, and the next year I had to have another surgery because I had an artery collapse in my abdomen, and so they cut me wide open, and I had to have it was like a bypass surgery for abdomen, and that one was really painful. That one was like physically hard to come back from, and then the cancer, and then you're just like, for a year and a half, I'm just like, okay, so what's going to happen next? Or uh, every time you go for a blood draw, because I was going once a month, and they would run tests to make sure it was still, was staying at bay. And so for quite a while, there's a part of you that's just expecting it to come back, right? Or there's going to be a next thing for me. Because for 3 years in a row, there was, two of them were literally close to death things, the brain aneurysm and the leukemia. We caught the leukemia so late, and it was just by accident that we caught it, that I was probably only a few weeks away from my brain bleeding out, because I didn't have really any symptoms, and my blood was thinning, and so um, yeah, so it took a long time inwardly to find a peace, even after I went back to work. I don't know. Did you have sort of an experience like that?
Yeah. Um, I think in some ways it allowed me to become a more authentic version of the best part of me,
Oh yeah.
and that's been an ongoing journey. I don't think back then I could have articulated it, but I felt like I was tired of being afraid of doing. I always wanted to be charitable and do nice things, but I
Mhm.
was always, for some reason, I had this fear if I did it, what people would think of me, and the dealing with my of other people's perceptions of me
Right.
paralyzed me, and stopped me from doing that. Well, I would say it put the ball in motion,
Hmm.
and then that has really led essentially to where I am today. But you know, yeah, it was. I haven't seen the world the same way since I've had cancer. Especially the sense of like looking for depth and meaning and
Hmm.
being unafraid to look for it, and you know,
The other thing too that was a little bit surprising to me that happened right after that is when I got back to work. I don't know a good way to couch this. I realized no, not probably, I wasn't as good of an employee and as good of a person and as good of a husband as I needed to be. Um, and so it's a little bit of it was kind of a rude awakening, but also just more like I decided, I don't know, for some reason I saw myself more fully. And like before that, let's say in my job, if something wasn't going my way, well, it was never my fault. They're not choosing me. They're not seeing the great work that I can do, and blah blah blah. And then after the cancer, when I was telling you that whole year that I was struggling and just struggling to like internally thinking, am I even going to make it? Even though I'm cancer free. I wasn't. It took me a long time to feel like I maybe wasn't going to die, basically. But I also realized that, yeah, no, all these things that you were saying before that were from external forces. You never took the time to like look inside and see what it is you have to do to make yourself better. I mean, if things aren't going the way that you need them to go, like in your job, maybe there's something that you're not. Have you looked at yourself? And so uh, that was an interesting journey, and a journey that was sort of very important to me. That happened right when I was done with, I went back to work after having cancer, and um, was something I wasn't expecting, but it was something I think was really important for me. Um,
yeah, I think I always took work too seriously, and that's always been my problem actually. Is
I think I didn't take it seriously enough. Was probably my
yeah.
problem.
And I think with cancer, I wanted to actually not take things as seriously and enjoy it. And it didn't start right away. Like unlike you, this is really kind of, again, my arc is not very simple one. It took me a while to get here.
Yeah.
Like, I've been cancer free for almost 15 years now, and I'm finally, I think it was 2 years ago that I made it. 2.5 years ago that I actually started this journey back into where I began, which was in seminary.
Hmm.
So, um, but I don't think I could have made this journey had I not had this cancer experience.
Oh, for sure. For sure. I mean, yeah, sure. It changes you, but it also, well, you said it's an inflection point, right? And so I think that inflection point was vitally important for me. It was one of the, defining moments of my life, probably.
Yeah, I think having that community of people who understand too is important. Like I was very nurtured in the cancer community by support groups, um, and it was finally where I could just break down and cry, and people would understand why.
Hmm.
So I'm 6'3" and 235. I'm a big guy, and I'm masculine, at least forwardly presenting. I'm masculine, and um, for me to cry in public, and I would not be taken seriously. And then, of course, I had to deal with that paralytic fear of being, standing out. Um, and so I couldn't do it. But when I had a support group, I could. And that made all the difference in the world.
Hmm. I feel like your physical presence and your personality always just makes you stand out in a positive way. So explain that to me when you are saying, when you're being vulnerable, you felt like you're standing out. I mean, your personality is already standing out, and I mean, you don't have a larger than life, but a little bit because you're a big guy and you have a great energy to you. So,
Yeah, I mean, I haven't come into my being with this yet,
uh-huh.
but I know I will be. Um, I think it goes back to growing up in Michigan and Holland, where I think if you stood out in a crowd, people would try to beat you down because there's a tremendous amount of pressure for people not to stand out, and also there's a sort of cultish view of how we do things there, where if anybody does stand out, we kind of beat them down to be in a manger. Like you can't think that you can't be this way, and there's it's almost like it's a well-regulated militia guarding those who
Right?
stand out. Like, and then even in high school. No, I don't think it's just unique to Holland, and that's not
Yeah,
fair. As I've been older, I grew older. Obviously, I learned that it's not unique to us. But I do think this idea that standing out in Holland, especially with the Protestant conservatism that the ethos there,
yeah.
that was really frowned upon. Like you were,
See, we met in elementary, and we were little kids. But the thing that I remember standing about, the thing that attracted to you as a friend was like, this guy is big and dorky and hilarious and funny, and he's got the greatest. Like, I love this fact that you were actually different than everybody else. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. It's like I don't know. Maybe that's just what I'm more attracted to in people in this world. But like, that was what I thought was awesome about you is that you stood out from the crowd and you're hilarious and you do silly things that I didn't like other people weren't comfortable in doing, I think. Of course we were just little kids, but
yeah, we got some fun stories.
yeah.
You reminded me of a lot of those the other day. Um, no, I think for me, standing out meant I was going to get beat up or chased
Right.
or humiliated or hated. And so this, fear of standing out because it would bring so much negative pressure on me,
Right.
particularly after the hostage crisis. And then, and the only way to get around that was really to, sort of to pull yourself out of that environment and
Hmm.
any way you could, or to operate within it. I could do sports, which I never really liked. I never liked football, even though I was decent at it. Um, I didn't like swimming, even though I did very well in swimming. But I had to have something that took the pressure off me and to, sort of focus my anger in some way that was an outlet because I couldn't fight everybody. But then I carried that anger and resentment in me for a long time. And then that turned out to be like, you know, everybody I met, I felt like had the same, um, I projected those same perceptions onto them that I did everywhere, when I started in Holland, that I am never enough and less than. It
Hmm.
started internally in the family, but it also was fed in the community. Um, and then it just took over and became a life of its own.
Right. And so
And
I wonder if part of what I'm missing too is I could just go ahead and fade back into the background whenever I needed to. I'm average height, average looks. I'm a white guy, right? Like you couldn't fade back into the background. Your size, your ethnicity is, was always front and center, no matter what.
that's right. And that was not lost on me. Like, and so going to a place and having anonymity was just this like weight off my shoulders,
Right.
and then to finally do things I wanted to do. Like I really, really wanted to go to seminary, really bad,
Hmm.
especially the one I went to. All of my favorite writers, thinkers were there. And I knew as soon as I walked in the hallway there in a visitation that this was for me. I absolutely knew it. There was no other choice. I was going to be here. I was going to do whatever it takes to make it happen.
So let me ask you about that then, because it sounds like when we're talking like after high school and that short time before you went to seminary, you seem to be very, still very angry young man in a way, or upset, or I don't know what.
Well,
Given
yeah,
where you
I mean,
were in your my life mentally, what was it that drew you to the seminary?
I was sitting in Hope College's dinner chapel one day, and I heard the song "Come Thy Way, Thy Truth I Like." It's originally written by George Herbert, but this particular version was the Antifound by R. Vaughan Williams. And the director of our choir was named we called him Coach. I forget his last name, but I think it was Reedberg, Roger Reedberg. We called him Coach, and beautiful, beautiful person, loved him to death. And he didn't know me from Adam. I walked up to him and I heard that song, and I felt like God was reaching out to me. It was like my Damascus Road experience.
Mm-hmm.
And and I was like, I'm going to do it. I'm tired of not, being something I'm not. And so I went up to him and I said, this song is so beautiful. It means a lot to me. And he didn't know me from Adam. He was a very, very kind person.
Mm-hmm.
And I had never talked to him, but you could just amazing. But he fell over his like bench and just like, what? And he goes, I never expected someone like you to say that to me. And that was the moment I decided I was going to take more religion courses. And really, my dad wanted me to be a doctor, and I have no ability to be a doctor, no desire. I didn't want the hours. I didn't want the life. Nothing about it appeals to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Not to say anything bad about the profession. It just, not me.
Right.
And so this was me. I did this
Mm-hmm.
taking religious courses, and then as I took more and more courses, I found I was very, very good at it. I didn't have to study as much, and then I kind of honed my other subjects that I kind of was not good at, because it made me want to study religion. So I thought, oh, I'll do this, and then it helped me realize I had the potential to be a better student of the classes.
Right.
And as I got better and better at it, and my writing was, people were, like the writing I had, my writing skills, I started exploring some of these writers most of the writers I explored came from the seminary I was going to. And I finally just kind of acknowledged the fact that I'm religious. I ended up joining a church, and then I got kicked out like 3 months later because they didn't ordain women. And then I fought them on it, which is so typical of me at that age.
Right.
Looking for conflict and fight, anywhere. But I didn't like their logical arguments about why women shouldn't be allowed to speak in churches.
Sure.
And then I ended up going to other churches that did, and then kind of finding a niche for myself at Hope College as a religion major, and then I ended up going to seminary in New York City, which was quite terrifying at first, but ended up being one of the most amazing experiences of my life. I'm still friends with everybody I knew there.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing.
So, what came next after seminary school?
I worked for so I did really, really well in seminary. I actually won this award, a couple awards, but the three bigger ones were I was known for being a very decent preacher, and then I was exegetic. My ability to and do language studies was very high. And my master's thesis, Religion and Imperialism, received the highest grade. And then I won this fellowship award called the Maxwell Fellowship for Promise of Future Excellence in Pastoral Ministry and Social Justice. And with all that, I got hired by I ended up working for a church in DC in my final year, Covenant Baptist, which is now United Church of Christ. But the pastor of that church, Dr. Dennis Wiley, is still one of my mentors and friends. I just talked to him about 2 weeks ago. He's better known for being the father of Samira Wiley, who is the actress in Orange is the New Black and Handmaid's Tale. Mm-hmm. I used to babysit her and her brother when they were kids. and now they've grown up, and it's an incredible story.
Right.
But he and I still keep in touch, and that was church in the inner city of DC. And I helped him set up a civil rights institute there in my final year at Union. And I went back for my graduation, and then I came back to DC, and I got hired to work in the Justice Wing of Denomination, United Church of Christ. That's the one my family has historically been affiliated with. So I started doing justice work there, and I was living with this friend of mine, living with this woman in a Section 8 housing in Northeast DC by Robert F. Kennedy Stadium, which at that time, it wasn't the hood, it was considered the ghetto, so it was not real bad, but it was bad. And we had like rats running in back and forth in our apartment. We would walk, our offices sat next to Capitol Hill, sat next to the Supreme Court. And there are a couple of senators and representatives who lived in that same building. They had apartments there. One was Newt Gingrich, and from Illinois, the Chicago senator. They lived in that apartment, so we would see them going in and out of these things every day, and that was real trippy. But when I was living there, when I was living with my friend Judy, and it was all platonic. Which is really funny because we tease each other that we have so much in common. You would think we'd be the ideal partner. We would have killed it.
That's the worst. That'd be the worst idea ever.
We were so compatible, but no, nothing. And if anything, we were revolted by each other. She was very clear about that with me. But we still remain friends to this day. But we, toward the end of my time there, I think it was, she left 3/4 of the way through our internship to be with her fiance that was falling apart. I stayed, and then I kept living in that house. And then it was, I think December of '96, my father passed. And then all these feelings of, I was super happy at this point, and the dirt poor, but I was super happy. Like I was doing everything I wanted to do. I was cut off from everybody and everyone that reminded me of my past. I was finally building the person Rameen that I thought I was meant to be. And then when he passed away, I lost a sense of direction, and I felt, oh my God, I failed my father because I didn't go to medicine. I'm not making money. I felt I let down the Iranian American community, which again was a projection because I really didn't know the Iranian American community that well.
Right.
But I felt like I wasn't a very good Iranian American, and then I felt like I was a ne'er-do-well, even though I was the work I did I thought was important. And I was going to be called to some churches to serve. I mean, there were people who were going to hire me. They were really looking at me, and that's when I got hired by a Norwegian oil firm in DC as a temp, and by an Iranian American guy who comes from a very prominent family in Iran. But he hired me because I was Iranian American and I worked hard. And that really was what kind of made me took that turn off course. And it took me about 25 years to get back to where I am. So, yeah, that's what happened.
There's so many things like that I find fascinating, just as an aside, like this idea of, like, you took a temp job, I assume, because you were broke and because of the work that you're doing. And that was it. It was just, it's a temporary job. And by taking this probably somewhat random job, had an astounding, it directed the next 25 years of your life.
That's right. And then, I went from making at the most $8,000 a year, when I worked for the church. I think my first salary was 30 grand, which was like ungodly amount of money to me. Which I think for most people today would be like, what? But so I did that, and I did well in there. The company, I remember crude went down to like $6, and in the Brent Sea, and these guys were super long crude contracts, and so they lost a ton of money. All their projects got buried, and And so they basically had to sell their operations. And then I went to go work for another company that hired me kind of sight unseen, um, to do what they call real time power trading. Power moves around the clock, so people trade it around the clock,
Mm,
on an hourly basis. And if you have generation, you have to manage it on an hourly basis. Well, actually, you have to manage it in a 5 minute increments
mhm,
around the clock. But so I got hired to do that, and I wanted, then you get all this money, and then you have a different, and you're sort of intoxicated by the whole thing because you do things you can't. I never thought I would be doing, eating
mhm,
at restaurants that I never considered eating at. And I'm living in kind of the DC Baltimore area. I'm making a lot of money, getting huge bonuses, able to travel for the first time and do nice things. And women are starting to become interested in me in ways that they weren't before. And I'm able to do things, at that time I ended up getting a black belt. I was running, I was rollerblading. I was a little bit, but all these things, I wasn't able to do. And
mhm.
then you get kind of caught up in this and you get wrapped up in it. And then, I had gotten married and then we had a child. The energy crisis hit in 2000, I think it was 2001 or Enron collapse just devastated the industry. I went to another job. That job, someone made an error in their programming error that on an auction, and ended up making we ended up selling something at a super high value. No, we ended up selling something at a super low value relative to the market price.
Mhm.
And that market price was priced out hourly and every day. So we were losing thousands of dollars in an hour, accumulated over a day. And it was just like they shut that down. It was nothing to do with me. And the person was a great person. She just made an honest mistake. Then we had to go to Portland. Then Portland, my wife worked there and I was raising her daughter. Then that didn't work out. My wife hated it. And then we moved to Newport Beach, and because I got hired there to become a manager of a trading floor, just a small company. That turned out to be a disaster because they didn't know what they were doing. And I ended up going to the city of Pasadena, and city of Pasadena was great, but then I got caught up in all the union politics, and it was just once you're in a union, it sounds great, and there's a role for it, but man, people know how to use the union politics to their advantage. It's something I've never seen before. And so we left there. My wife was unhappy. We moved to Houston, and then I think we moved to Houston in 2006, and we both started working within like 3 months of moving there. We've been there ever since, and I'm still here. I'm still here. So this is probably the longest I've lived outside of Holland, Michigan, in one place.
Mhm.
Um, and then that story gets even more developed because my marriage was not a very solid one. It's not unhealthy. So after I went through all the cancer treatments, um, I tried to become what I thought was a better husband, but I realized I couldn't rationalize an irrational partner. And if I wanted to survive and enjoy life, I couldn't be in this anymore. And so we got divorced, and that brought a whole host of other issues I had to deal with. And that was post cancer treatments, obviously.
Mhm.
And then I went to a hedge fund, and then the hedge fund I had been at for 11 years, and I did very, very well there. I mean, I made a lot of money as a director of operations and risk management. Um, and Yeah, I'll let it stop there and let you ask some questions because that's where I decided to go back.
So, yeah, what I would so you're talking when you're first talking about your early experience, um, you're a lot more detailed about your time in DC and when you're doing good work, and then we started talking about from the time that ended to it was very short. You really compressed that, so I don't know. There seemed to be more joy in that first part, and a big chunk in the middle where you're just going from here to there, and it seems like must have been a lot of turbulence on the inside of you.
Well, I was in a tumultuous relationship, no doubt that contributed to it.
So that
But
and that can consume so much of your life that you're not really paying. You think that you don't have time to look at yourself because it's all consuming about what's going on around you, maybe.
and I think that you can probably make the case that my ex that everything had to be focused on her needs and what she and I didn't grow up what I thought was a strong idea of relationships. So I tend to be a people pleaser anyways.
Mhm.
So I wanted to do whatever I could to prove that, um, well, I thought the problems in the relationship were all mine, because she made me think it always was. And if I did one more thing, if I jumped one more hurdle, things would get better. Just and then I realized I can't keep doing this. I can't. But yeah, I mean, I've had some amazing experiences over the last 10 years, working at a hedge fund. And I love the forensic accounting of what I did. Just absolutely loved it.
Mhm.
Could do it 20 hours a day. I never got bored. Um,
So
but
was there an aspect to that whole through your career where because you went from ministry to finance, did you was it a means to an end, or did you find the work satisfying, or was it not till you
I
got to
wanted
the
a
hedge
lot of
fund?
money. I wanted to make a lot of money, and I wanted to do it because on the inside, internally, I felt like no one could like me intrinsically, but they would appreciate and respect me if I was wealthy.
Hmm.
And I found a lot of the things I did, even some of these charity rides that I did. I love bike riding. I
Hmm.
really started questioning my motives around 2 years ago about why I was doing this. Were I doing these rides because I was trying to get people from my past to say, yeah, you really are a good person because I needed that validation, or was I doing it for the right reasons?
Hmm.
Um, and so, further out to further open myself up a little bit,
Yeah.
right around when I entered the industry, pretty into my first wife, I started developing an eating disorder that fueled by my um, self hate and um, childhood traumas that I went through. Um, and that had lasted with me. Well, it's going to last with me for the rest of my life. But essentially, I was bulimic, and bulimia nervosa was I'm diagnosed with. But this eating disorder was just, I would binge eat and purge, and binge eat, and it was just like I'm getting all this evil out of me. And then but I would crave things, and so no, I had this lack of control in my life. I just wasn't able to manage. But it definitely started when I began the industry. So I think I fed a lot of the worst things about me, even though I did a lot of charitable work. And I think the charitable work made me feel good. I don't apologize for that, but I questioned some of my motives doing it. Was I doing it because I was genuinely concerned about cancer patients, or was there an ulterior motive for people to make me think I was okay? And think, was I trying to project the image of a nice guy because other people were looking at me, and I finally got some positive recognition from people in my hometown and stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and so
It's
I can't lie.
yeah. It's you know it reminds me of another inflection point in my life, which was when I went to rehab for drinking. I quit drinking. I don't. Must have been, I don't know, 18 years ago. I can't even keep track anymore. Maybe let's see. Yeah, let's about 18 or 19 years ago. Um, uh, but what I had realized, the hardest thing for me during that was the realization that I had this reputation as a very nice guy. When I was the restaurant that I was working at, I was a very nice guy and such a sweet guy, and all this kind of stuff. But underneath, like, um, I was drinking a lot, and I was doing a lot of drugs, a lot of cocaine, and I was married with a young, I was married and had a young child, and so I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, externally, everybody thought was I was a good guy, but internally, I kind of was kept bearing the fact that I was a shitty person. Like a good person doesn't do this to young family, going out and partying all night and all this kind of stuff. So when I went to rehab, uh, the quitting drinking part was pretty easy for me. It was the breaking myself down to get a full view of who I was, and it wasn't a good picture. But I felt when I left rehab, I felt better than I ever had in my life. Even though at rehab, uh, Kim at the time had left me because she's like, I'm glad you're sober now, but I can't. She couldn't be with me, but she shouldn't have been after all the stuff that I had done, right? And it wasn't like I didn't do anything physical or I wasn't out cheating or anything like that. It's just Um, I just wasn't being a good person. You know what I mean? I was not. Uh, I was out. I was acting like I was young and invincible, and I could go party all night when I should be building my career and all this kind of stuff. So when I was in rehab, I just totally broke myself down and tore down all these walls that I had built up. Like, and I realized like I'm just not the person that I think that I am and that I'm projecting to be. And so it's kind of a harsh moment, right? When you get to that point and I mean, it happened a little bit earlier, I feel like in my life than it's maybe something you can relate to. Like it maybe happened a little bit later, but still, when you realize that you let yourself get away from yourself and you're not the person that you think you are or that you're letting everybody else think you are, it can be kind of devastating.
One of the things that came to mind when you were talking about your alcoholism is that Russell Brand, the comedian and radio show host, now has a podcast.
Mhm.
He says that alcoholism is an outward manifestation of a deeper symptom,
Yeah.
and I think all disorders basically are,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And so, what were you saying was your underlying malaise or symptom that drove you on this? Like,
Um, yeah, sure. It starts with, I think I think it happens a lot to a lot of people. You start with a little bit of a lie, trying to project yourself to be something that you're not, and then it just starts snowballing, right? Um,
but you felt like an imposter in your own body, like the imposter syndrome after a while. Like this, who you were outwardly projecting was not who you really
oh yeah, and then I had to keep uh, telling lie after lie to keep up that that facade, and then you know, I mean, I wasn't doing a lot of coke, but I was doing a fair amount of you gotta when you're doing cocaine, first thing you gotta do is you gotta hide the money from your family because I'm not, I was a restaurant manager and my wife's a teacher. It's not like you got $1 million bank account, So just the lies after the lies, and coming home at 5 in the morning after work. Oh, with a compressor, whatever it is, you just start building up lie after lie, and then you get caught in trying to continue to build that story, and you're not in a good place. So you consume more stuff to bury down the fact that you're not who you're presenting to be. It's a vicious cycle, right?
So, who is Mike Olson?
Well, I mean, I don't know if I can define that in a sentence, but I feel more, I've never felt more comfortable in my skin than I have in the last 2 or 3 years. Um, I don't know if that comes with age or everything that I went through. But I think once I got past cancer and then I took another look at my life and like, okay, yeah, you're not being like the best employee you can be or the best person you can be. What's going on? And then I think after that, and I finally like looked at myself uh, without bias. Once I looked at myself without bias, which probably took all the way until after I survived cancer, is then when I became more comfortable with who I am. I don't know.
Because the way I look at it is like I don't have to be one thing, right? I can be in constant state of becoming.
Oh yeah.
How I define myself today, um, I don't want to be that same person 6 months from now.
Hmm.
I want to continuously change and grow. I want to blossom into do different things. Well, the core of me is still the same,
Right.
but I'm okay with this now. I'm okay, like realizing that my path from point. I'm not meant to go from point A to B in life.
No. No.
But I had another inflection point about 2.5 years. What was it now? Maybe about 3 years ago, 2 years ago. I get the dates mixed up. I mean, I don't know if this is the senility of my age or just,
Right.
after a while, the numbers don't mean so much to you as they used to. But I was reading this book by a guy. His name is Rich Roll. I really recommend this book to you called Finding Ultra, and journey from sort of mediocrity and alcoholism to becoming one of the premier ultra athletes of all time.
Hmm.
And he's 54, and he did this by. So he started out. He grew up. I think he was born in Michigan, but he kind of was a journeyman throughout his life, like I was. And he ended up becoming an alcoholic before he went to college. It was actually at University of Michigan. He was hanging out with the diver Greg Louganis there, and he started drinking. It was the first time he lost himself in anything, and the alcohol just became a complete obsession. And then
Hmm.
and he was a bright guy. He went into Stanford, and after Stanford, he did some paralegal work in New York City, and most of his time was spent drinking and going on these cocaine-addled binges. And then he went into Cornell Law School, and then became an entertainment lawyer back out to the LA area. He was a functional alcoholic for a large part of his early career, and then he got into a car accident, and they basically said you either go to jail or you go to rehab for 3 months. So they put him in one of those $50,000 a month
Right.
rehab places, and it was in there that he really found himself.
Hmm.
And he left there. He had these horrible eating habits, and his wife was a vegan and into yoga. He ended up he went to like he would go to work, but he'd eat these things like 4 Big Macs and 2 donuts before bed.
Hmm.
But he was just blocked. He was beast. I mean,
Yeah. Or
oh, he walked up the stairs and kissed his kids goodnight, and he was basically he got winded and thought he was going to have a heart attack. And he told his wife he wanted to be a vegetarian. And so he started out, she did this 10-day process, a cleansing process, and he became a vegetarian. And they started doing, running and doing things. And then it turned into, at some point, he said became a vegan. And his big thing now is a plant-powered lifestyle.
Mhm.
But in that process, from the age of 32 to 42, when he became known, he became like this famous ultra athlete. He said, that process wasn't just me being a success every day. It was me on an overnight journey to get there. It was 10 years being okay with it.
Yeah.
And I was reading his book one day when I was in Seattle. And I think my wife was in the Philippines with our kids. And I was on my way down to go see a friend of mine on the Oregon coast, one of my closest friends. And I read these lines in there that said, "The journey is the destination, and there are no finish lines." And it was that point, that was the big inflection point for me,
Mhm.
because all my life, kind of like what you said, I went from point A to B. There was no meaning or intentionality behind it. I wasn't enjoying it.
Mhm.
I made a lot of money. I traveled a lot of places, but I worked the whole fucking time.
Mhm.
So every picture I put up, everything I did was really making it seem that snapshot was my reality, but it wasn't my
Right.
reality. I was miserable.
Yeah. I
And
remember
there,
I remember during that time, uh, my wife would call me a pleasure piggy, and I hated it because uh, it was so accurate. This is really at the time, right when things are bad and before I go into rehab. And she's like, "You're a pleasure piggy," and it was true. I couldn't wanting to deal with anything else was so foreign to me because I don't think I wanted to deal with anything that I would just whatever pleasure I could bring in to bury it down was all that I would do, you know?
yeah, you don't want to deal with the pain, so you have to, you have to sort of like treat
Mhm.
it with some sort of temporary pleasure. And
Yeah. So for who I am, interestingly, I think when I was in rehab was probably the biggest um, flip that I've ever done in my life. It's sort of a switch that flip because until I went to rehab, and I don't know how to explain it, but I really just like I had to first of all, the quitting drinking, which was very lucky for me, was super easy. Um, because that wasn't really my root problem. So, you know what I mean? It was just a tool that I was using. I had never really looked, I don't know, I just tore every single wall that I had built up and I had never felt so horrible and happy and free at the same time. You know what I mean? And so, because I never really, just from a young age, it's just I don't know. I finally it was a something that I it was a point where I needed to just be honest with myself. I don't think I'd ever been honest with myself from the time I became a young adult at 18 until that point. So, um, and that's sort of if you talk about a journey, but that's kind of where I feel like almost my life journey started because up till then, I don't know, I was kind of a shell of a person. And then once I realized how fucking flawed of a human being I was, and I realized that in rehab, and that like, okay, that's when I kind of started over. And so the journey since then has been extremely flawed, but it's been, you know, uh, I'm glad that happened. And, it was a very important part of my life. Probably more impactful than having the cancer, I think, was that time I spent in
Yeah, I mean,
rehab.
there's a lot of things that you're saying that I feel like I could, I could sort of expound on in many different ways. But I think the bigger thing is, it's okay to be a failure because you don't get success until you fail, and it's
Hmm.
okay. Like falling, you look at other people's success and you think it comes naturally. It doesn't.
Hmm.
There's, and you have to be okay with that. You have to be okay saying, "This didn't work. I'll try something else," and
Yeah.
not beat yourself up because that's part of the process of winning. Is you have to fail. You have to practice. Um, and so I have a new philosophy. You know, basically embracing failure
Hmm.
instead of looking to be a peak performer at everything. I'm trying. It's okay to fail, and
Yeah.
I have to learn that, and that's tough.
Hmm.
um, and then I think the other thing is sort of like, if you don't enjoy going from point A to B, or you don't know who you are, you need to pivot out of the whatever you're doing and stop and and actually come to terms with who you are, right? Like
Right.
this is me,
Hmm.
and it takes a lot of strength and courage, internal strength and courage to do this, I think, because all these projections, the artifice that we have built up in front of us that
Hmm.
prevented us from, sort of being authentic versions of who we are, tearing that down, it's quick, and devastating because you realize that you spent all that time doing it for what?
Hmm.
It's a miserable experience,
Right.
And so, you know, it's when you say a lot of these things, our trauma manifested itself differently for you and I, but it was the exact same um, end game
Hmm.
for trauma, right? And where it overlapped is that I don't think it's hard to say whether cancer is caused by the stress we put ourselves under or not. I tend to think it can be,
Hmm.
but clearly our immune system at one point just broke down from everything we have done to ourselves
Hmm.
mentally
Yeah.
and um, whether that was stress induced or whatever, but I tend to think it can be. Um, and until we have come back into a sense of completeness and own ourselves and our relationships with ourselves, you
Hmm.
know, we were sort of doomed to repeat these cycles that you and I had gone through, but just separately.
Right. So you find yourself in Texas, in a great relationship,
Oh yeah, my
in a
wife is
great
awesome.
in a great job, um, and you've taken the so you get to this place. Now tell me how you got from that place to um it's pretty easy to say you wanted to get back into the ministry, but to do it, I mean, there's so many. I mean, just the actual logistical, financial. I mean, there's just the logistical decision alone can be overwhelming. Just to, you know what I mean? Not to mention the emotional journey and the personal journey
Yeah,
to
it's not
get
a quick process,
right.
do it.
What compelled you, and what was that process like? I know it
Well,
wasn't too big.
it literally did start like 2 or 3 years ago. It might have been 2019 when I was in Seattle and I came to this. Like I just didn't know how to get back to normal, and it took me some. I was listening to a podcast. I was on Rich Roll about this athlete. She was a famous, she was an amazing sprint triathlete, and she has been bulimic and anorexic most of her life, and but her honesty in dealing with it was really, you know, really inspiring to me. And on the link in this podcast, I clicked on the resources for anorexia nervosa in Houston, or eating disorders in Houston, Texas, and I found a woman here who actually specializes in male eating disorders. And I think that might have been in the 20 kind of 2020. I started with her, and eating specialist, a nutritionist, and dietitian, and that was really really impactful. Like for me, just admitting I had an eating disorder and that I was trapped by it was very emotional for me. Then trying to figure out why it was this, why I had put up all these perceptions in terms of finding who I am and this whole process, they've helped me realize that in order for me to come to terms with who I'm meant to be, I have to stop projecting so much about what I think others are. And part of that was dealing with body dysmorphia issues, where I hated being in public because I stood out, but also because I stood out because I thought I was ugly, I thought I was too fat, I thought I had I'm not fashion forward, or whatever it was, right? I'm not.
Yeah.
And one part of me was envious of it, and the other part of me, resented it. And so I would try to do sports and do all these things to, do that binge purge cycle and all those things to make myself thinner and work out harder, and just doing everything wrong that you could possibly imagine.
Right.
But I wasn't enjoying it, and they helped me come to terms with the fact that I have to deal with my body image issues. And part of that was just learning how to accept my body for what it was, and that it's a process to go from point A to B, and you have to be okay in that process. And I wasn't.
Hmm.
Um, and in the meantime, while I'm doing that, I'm at a hedge fund, and we're making one dumb decision after another in terms of our trading positions, and you know, people who are calling the shots were making really bad decisions, and I got kind of tired of, like, why am I chasing these dollars all the time? Like, I can go on vacation, but I'm not present for my family. I'm not enjoying anything. I'm putting pictures up there as if I am, and I'm trying to be witty, and, and basically I'm being further alienated from myself as during this whole process.
Hmm.
Again, it's this whole thing. If I have a lot, people will respect me more and like me. And what I realized with my eating, that was feeding my eating disorder. What I realized with the therapy I went through was I have to stop. And who am I? And I talked to my sister. I think it was close to her birthday last year, and she was really worried about me because of my stress levels. And she wanted to put me in a wellness center for 3 months. Her and her husband would have paid for it. She wanted me to out, and I didn't know this because my sister is usually not this. I didn't. She hasn't always been this compassionate towards me. Or I mean, she has been. I just wasn't able to see it.
Right.
But that's a better way of putting it. But when I think it was in January of this past year, a severance package, and I just took it. But up until then, I was ready. I mean, this journey has taken me 2 years to get there. I thought about going into charitable work, but I didn't really want to do that. Everybody I talked to, two pivotal people who were really helpful to me were, outside the bodies of my wife, was very inspirational in this. But two people from our past were Heidi and Jenny, um, Heidi Ropin now, and Jenny Moore. Um, and they were both really encouraging me to be more authentic version of myself. And it was nice to have that positive feedback. And then the more I started talking to people, I talked to my sister. I told her what I wanted to do to go back into ministry. She was like, "I'm so proud of you." She's an atheist. So she was like, "I'm very proud of you. This is exactly what I want you to do." All the people who I thought were judging me were actually the ones telling me that,
Hmm.
no, this is what I really want you to do.
Yeah.
And that was pretty remarkable.
Hmm.
Um, and I started the process. I brought my minister over here, told him what led me to this moment, like I told you, and I said I want to go. I want to go back into ministry. He goes, "Great, this is what we got to do." Boom, and he's a wonderful guy. I love him. I love him to death. But then in late January, I was taken under care in the church to be they call it a member in discernment, but starts the ordination process. Um, In February, we were going to meet. I was going to meet the committee on ministry for a conference, but then we got hit with that cold blast and everything got derailed by about a
Yeah.
month in Texas. So, but I met with him and the committee on ministry a short time later. Then they put me as a member, official member in discernment in the conference. I went again the conference of ministry in April, and they said yes, you can be. We're going to fast track you to the ecclesiastical council, which is a board of all these people who ask questions. They were meeting in May. In May, I met with them, and they were interrogating me on like, how did you? Why should we do this now? It's fast, like. And as people started talking to me, it became apparent to them that I was ready.
Mhm.
I was fit for it, everything. And I did the psychological profiles, I did the background checks, everything was done. I was building up my online profile. And then finally, in May 15, I was allowed to be, they call it approved for ordination pending call. I had preached a couple times. One of them was probably one of the best sermons I've ever written. It was on the unnamed concubine. And it was just a very powerful, powerful, brutal story in the Bible. And I really wanted to tap into it artistically. And I thought this is one of the few times that I could have this opportunity. So
Mhm.
I did that. And then each successive done afterwards, I've opened myself up as a creative writer and hopefully future artist to tap into this connection I have, I think, with God to to sense the human condition and to articulate it through the sermon.
Mhm.
And as I do this more and more, Mike, I'm finding myself more and more grounded and more coming into my own being.
Mhm.
And I no longer care what anybody from our high school or past thinks of me. Yeah, I'm flawed, so are you. You
Mhm.
know, you're not going to make me feel bad about my sins. You happen to, I
Yeah.
know they do because I hear them every day.
Yeah.
But I only I'm not worried about. I mean, I think about. I know people. I know there's some judgment in going into ministry, and I'll hear it, but I'm no longer paralyzed by it.
Yeah.
I know this is what I'm meant to be, and I'm unafraid.
So what I think I find interesting is, and I think I've experienced this too, like from the outside, it seems like not sudden, but like a massive and kind of sudden change in direction. But really, it's just the end point of all the things that was happening. I mean, obviously all your life, but really within the last couple of years, to get you to that point. It's never, you know what I mean? It's never just like, oh my God, he's off doing this now. And that's a crazy pivot. Well, no, you've been pivoting for the last 2 years or however long it is. It's just that last moment when you have to sort of, make that decision.
Yeah, I talked to this really close friend of mine in Chicago. She was my mentor in seminary, and she's now a professor in Chicago Theological Seminary. And I told her what I wanted to do, and I said, "Look, I flaked on this thing twice now. Can I
Mhm.
do it again?" And she goes, "Yeah." Go. It's just like Eli when he said, "Here I am, Lord." And if you hear God responding back,
Mhm.
you know. And she goes, "You got to get down on your knees and pray." She's a very spiritual, powerful woman. I mean, just love her. She's an amazing human being. She's also now a Buddhist. Buddhist, so a growing field within our religion. And she has this immense, like, just eternal knowledge of things. And I'm just kind of in awe of her as a speaker and a friend.
Mhm.
And so I did that. And I just made myself vulnerable before God. And I said, yeah, and I heard her call back and I said, yeah, I'm going to do it. And that started the process. So it is quick. It's 6 months. So to the outsider, yeah, but it goes back to the thing people talk about. I talked about earlier where success isn't just the tip of the journey, right? When you see someone reach Everest, it's all
Mhm.
these little failures and everything else that get up there.
Mhm.
So this has really been a lifelong experience for me to get to this point, and I
Yeah.
wasn't ready for it outside of seminary. I'm ready for it now. I'm ready to be vulnerable before God and humankind, and before with the text I read. I'm ready to be with people on their personal journeys, no matter what my relationship is with them, either with past, present, don't know me at all. I'm
Mhm.
ready to hear it. Um, but I think I just sense there's so many unmet needs out there, and I think I want to be a part of the solution and change. I want to voice change, and I want to promote it, positive interaction.
Yes. Well, also while finding some internal peace as well, right?
It does make me peaceful. This is my journey. Like doing everything else was not internally satisfying at all.
Hmm.
The tough part for me has been the preaching. And my last couple of sermons sound like I'm on a coke binge before I get up there because I'm so nervous. But it's because I'm expressing parts of me in public, and I'm very introverted. I'm not shy, but I'm just very introverted.
Hmm.
And so for me to share these things is very difficult. And I'm overcoming my trauma of being judged,
Hmm.
so I'm rushing through it. And so I have to find ways of calming down
Hmm.
because I know the content of what I have is for me as a writer, and is very inspirational, both how it's received and how it's becoming across.
Hmm.
Um,
I I would say, how's your journey in not being critical of yourself? When we were texting the other day, you were saying some of the same thing. It's like I really got to work on how my sermons are going, and maybe I'm gonna bring somebody in to help me with this and that. I'm like, Ray, how many times have you preached in the last year? Your answer was four, and I think two of those was within the last 2 weeks, right?
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Uh,
well, I appreciate wanting to get better. And this also like you're just you know actually starting to do that part of it, the actual getting in front and preaching. So that's just it's going to take some time, right?
right. And so what I need is my congregation is being very loving about pushing me into being the person I'm meant to be.
Hmm.
So the critiques I'm getting back, most of them are just learn how to slow down
Yeah.
because the content is they appreciate the content and they feel a connection to God through my connection to God,
Hmm.
which is what really your call should be, I think.
Right.
And I'm not trying to beat myself up for it, but it's kind of cute when I see myself on screen and I'm like, what? I thought I was going a lot slower than this.
Yeah. It's ve-
um,
it's very difficult to see oneself on screen too. It's something I've become very used to, but it's not the easiest thing to deal with either.
so does it trigger things for you then too? I mean, you're talking to me, but I mean, you're talking to
No, I
yourself.
don't. No, it just no. I don't. Nope. I'm very comfortable in my body and who I am, and I don't know. Like I would within the last 4 or 5 years, I think it's a function of getting older. I don't mind putting stuff out there. I don't. I'm not uncomfortable with sharing myself. You know what I mean? I don't know. It just doesn't bug me. I've been through enough. Like I don't know. This is who I am. You fucking like it or you don't. Right?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of let the pieces fall where they may,
Right. I'm incredibly um flawed person. We all are. So I don't have a problem putting myself out there. It's more of the stuff like you know what, I'll go back and I'll watch this. And when I when I was podcasting with Rob a lot, when we got away from it, and then we recorded something a few weeks back that I ended up not putting out there. But I noticed how many times I was saying and all the stuff that I had worked on in those first 10 episodes had kind of gone away. So that's the kind of thing that I'll be critical about, like my articulation and how I was saying blah blah blah, But I don't know. It doesn't bother me so much to put myself out there. I don't know.
it doesn't bother me if I stutter through a sentence at all.
Yeah. Uh,
Um, but yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit triggered seeing myself on screen,
yeah. So for
and
me,
I see my flaws.
I don't know. So for me, part of it is like I don't know how to explain this. Maybe I'll just go. Um, if I go way back, I started. My degree is in journalism, right? From Eastern, from whatever. And 25 years, 25, 30 years ago, I started out in marketing at U of M. And I did marketing for a couple of years. And then my daughter was born. It made more sense for me to be financially just to be a stay-at-home dad and wait tables on the weekends because I had waited tables on and off for years, and I was into this great restaurant already, right? And um, so that ended up being bartending on Saturday and Sunday, and at that point, it was great because I was making so little in my first professional job that just by bartending on Saturday and Sunday, plus the savings from childcare, it was like break even. So me quitting my job, I didn't lose any money. So um, bartending on the weekend became to managing on the weekend, then Saturday, Sunday, and then Monday, and then eventually that's what I ended up doing, right? Becoming a restaurant manager, and I did that, and then I got into U of M, and I into food service. So, but I also had that base in marketing. That's what I started out in, right? And so in journalism, I was always like, um, it was always in the back of my mind. So I don't know, maybe 10 years ago or something like that, maybe not quite that long ago, um, on a fly. Actually, it was, I don't know if you remember Google Plus, but it was like Google's little competition for Facebook many years ago. And I happened to meet a couple of people on there that were tech journalists. And I've always been really into tech, and so I just took a flyer and said, "Hey, can I start writing for you?" Um, and they're like, "Yeah." So I did a few articles. I went to Vegas and covered CES one year, and so I had this little side thing, right? And that I tell that story because that website eventually went away, and I stopped freelance. I only did like 5 or 10 articles, but I really got sort of the bug for this technology stuff and YouTube. So I started learning YouTube and how to do videos, and a lot of it was because my son and I were playing a bunch of video games. I'm like, oh, how do you do this? How do you record it? So that became my hobby, right? And so my day job was waiting restaurant. I'm doing food service management at a university. It was fine. Not what I was intended to do, but I didn't really. I mean, it was fine. I liked the work. I didn't really think about actually how much I did or didn't like the work. To be honest with you, it was the job. Love the people. Love the commodity. So it's all good. But on the side, I started developing you know, these skills with technology and video and some writing, and I'm like, maybe I can try to get back into marketing. And I tried applying for a few things here and there, and I never even got an interview, and it all made sense to me because at that point I was somebody approaching 50 and had been out of business for a while. Like obviously everything's changed. When I was doing it, we're selling books and courses to lawyers through brochures, right? And so everything now is obviously digital and social media and all that kind of stuff. So it made sense to me that nobody would took a fly on me for an interview because I didn't really have the background. I was just like, I want to try. So then I'm like, well, you know what? I'm just gonna keep making videos, YouTube videos, and every once in a while, I don't care if I have people follow me on YouTube or anything like that. I started to understand how much I enjoyed it, and then I would look at a video I made a couple of years ago compared to what I made now. I'm like, oh, I didn't even realize that I'm getting better at this. You know what I mean? Because I was just doing it for fun. And so then the pandemic hit, and all the things that you go through, which for me included buying a drone and doing some drone cinematography and upgrading some of my
I
equipment.
love that, by the way.
Yeah.
That was my favorite that you when you I watched every one of those. Like, just I loved it.
Well, and that started actually during my chemo. It would be like how I would get away from everything. A lot of times I would have my drone in my truck, and then after chemo, I would go fly the drone, depending on how I felt. And it had a little bit more meaning to me than just, you know what I mean? So, um, anyway, I got to a point where going into this past fall, I'm like, well, I'm gonna try. I've been working on my skills, and I accumulate. Like, by the way, this is me doing like one YouTube video at this point every other month or something like that. It's not like I'm trying to be a YouTuber and make money. I'm like, but this is going to be the thing that's going to bring me some pleasure, right? And so I still have these lists of all these videos. Like, okay, I'm going to try in 2021 to put up one YouTube video a week. and not because I want to become a YouTuber, but because I want to do it. I want to get better. I enjoy it. And so I had a all list of these interesting, like I was going to do tech videos and all this kind of stuff. Um, and then because of the pandemic, um, I got put in, everything slowed way down in food service in a university, as you can imagine, during the pandemic because we sent everybody home. And U of M, uh, among the many amazing things working for them, is that they've kept us whole, right? They didn't have to. They could have furloughed us, but we were able to stay whole and keep working the whole time. And part of it was, let's redeploy people while we're slow. Let's see what they've done in the past. And, like if, you know, they knew that I had experience in marketing. So, like, well, let's put them in marketing for 6 months to help that department do whatever we can do because we have all this excess labor. And it was very forward thinking. What can we do with the talent that people have at this very moment to move the organization forward? So when we get back to this coming fall, we've made our organization better, was basically the overall philosophy, right? It was a great philosophy. So I was able to get into the marketing department to do some videos because they knew that I made videos. And so in December, once I got my foot in the door, um, I've stayed in there ever since. And so now after all these years, I'm actually back into marketing. I work for marketing at Michigan Dining instead of working as a food service manager at Michigan Dining.
That's what
Um,
I was wondering because you talked about being a manager of the food service side in the past tense, and
right.
so I didn't know you made that transition.
It was, I mean, a lot of things fell in line for me in this transition. It's something that I wanted to do, but I didn't think I was going to be able to do it. So I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to become a YouTuber that's a hobby, not a YouTuber as a job, if that makes sense, right? Like, it's okay. I'm going to ride out my career at Michigan Dining because I love working for U of M and I like the department a ton. And the job is great. So, like, yeah, I'm just keep being a food service manager, and this is going to be my thing. I really enjoy making these videos. And I'm going to do this because I'm not going to be able to get in marketing again, and that's okay. Um, but so early last September, and this is, uh, I don't know if this is a story about jumping on the right opportunity or just being at the right place or just being lucky. I think it's just being lucky. But it's September, um, and our chef, we have like 8 or 10 units in our department, a lot of big units. Our chef at the unit I was working at walks by and he's like, "What you doing?" He's like, "Well, they want me to make this video at South Quad about it's like a recipe video, and they're gonna film it with an iPhone." I'm like, "No, no, no, no. We can't use an iPhone for this thing. Let me email whoever it is and see if they'll let me do it." And they're like, "Okay, so let me do it." And so I bring all my equipment and that I accumulated, lights, cameras, like shit like this, right? That I have no reason to even own, but I couldn't, this is my hobby. I'm like, well, I want to figure out lighting, so I'm gonna buy lights so I can figure out how to do it better, right? There's not like there's never like I gotta figure out this lighting because my job depends on it, and you know what I mean? I just like I want to figure this shit out, and so um, I'm running this big production at one of unit filming this recipe video, and our new director just walks by and sees me doing this. Goes, "That's interesting." And then in December, they're like, "Hey, let's put you in marketing. We want to do some videos while we have the time because I saw you in September make this video, and you have all this stuff, and it's clearly something you know how to do." And then when I got in there, I was so excited. Like I was just like I was just like bouncing in my chair because I didn't think I was ever gonna have this opportunity. So I just went, quite frankly, balls to the wall and just did whatever I could because I was having so much fun. And that's how I ended up in marketing. So, and I'll probably be uh, just structurally, I'll probably be able to do it for at least the next year or so. So I'm very excited about it.
That's pretty cool. Um, so you've transitioned to the restaurant business. So if you look at the arc of your journey, it's not linear either, but along the way you put things together that are the logical outcome is where you are today.
Right. And so the interesting thing too is like I couldn't it's not like I've spent the last 30 years coming up with these great marketing ideas. or whatever, and I just haven't had the job. It's the fact that I've spent all this time in food service. Like I know exactly I know a lot of all my ideas that I come up with are because I've been in food service for so long. Like if I'm coming up with an idea for social media, it's because it makes sense to me because I've been in the department for so long. So I'm still in the same department. I'm still in food service. I'm just doing marketing. And so that tie is like I couldn't just go to an agency. You know what I mean? Like that tie is super important. I have all this institutional knowledge. I know everybody, so I can bring that all into the job. It's not just like I was able to make this great pivot. Does that make sense?
Actually, yeah, but there's two books that I've read within the last month. One called Change by Adam Grant, and another one called uh, maybe I don't know, but one's by Adam Grant, the other one's David Epstein. I think David Epstein has changed, and I think the other one, I forget the title of it, but essentially what they're saying is that what makes people better workers, and for people our age than people who are specialists, is that the resiliency to learn things outside of our profession. Because what you learn outside your profession uh, actually enables you to navigate the pitfalls of innovation, and what comes along when you try to do something innovative where the world changes. Now, there are certain jobs like being a doctor where you have a corpus of history behind you that you need to do,
Mhm.
and so like the counter argument by the Tiger Mom from Yale University
Right.
is you should be specific in one field, and that's actually taken from Malcolm Gladwell too. But even then, it's kind of bullshit, Mike, because building on prior things of knowledge,
Mhm.
uh, building on a prior knowledge base, you only expand so much if you limit so there's a whole wealth of information to be discovered out there that can to make you change and grow.
Right.
Um, and this is one of the pitfalls people will see coming up in artificial intelligence. It's this continual building of past what you know to do things more efficiently.
Mhm.
It doesn't make you more innovative. It just
Right.
means things get done quicker.
Mhm.
Um, and therefore, like all these professions, at some they have terminal points as a result. Like some of the things you learn will always have a terminal point because you can't learn anymore unless you find that supplemental stuff
Right.
around you to help you become innovative. And so for your journey, you did all this stuff on the side that actually helps you become
Right.
a better marketing person, whereas someone stuck in marketing would not have been able to do this.
Right. Absolutely. And for me, the weird thing for me, like the whole point of the whole story for me is like the weirdest part of all of it to me is, and the reason I was telling because it's talking about your journey to becoming back into the ministry is like I enjoyed my job. I liked my job, but I never realized I didn't have any joy in the job. Well, I want to rephrase that.
You like aspects of your job, but not the totality of it.
I didn't think like I didn't enjoy the technical part of being a restaurant manager was never that interesting to me. The knowledge that you have to have. It was the relationships and the mentoring of kids and all that stuff. I guess what I'm trying to say is like I never expected at 50 to find actual joy in my job. I wasn't looking for joy in my job. I was happy with my job, but it was a means to an end, right? It's like I go to work so I can enjoy my family and have a paycheck and all that kind of stuff. And I was neither happy nor unhappy in my job. It was a fine job, but like I didn't really expect um like I like working now. Like I like my job. I'm so excited about my job and that hasn't, and not a bit of that has waned since when I got that opportunity 6 months ago. And so that to me is what stands out to me about it is I don't know that was a nice experience to realize that I hadn't really realized you could have that much joy at a job, just the actual work, right? I still don't want to. I mean, I don't want to work any more than the hours that I was working before. I don't want to dive in and work harder and nonstop because I'm enjoying it. It's just when I'm doing the work, it's like I'm happy. And before that, the job didn't make me happy or sad. It just didn't have any effect on me. And this, I enjoy the work so much
Yeah, you
because
like the process.
right. Well, basically, it feels like I was doing all this personal work so I could become a YouTuber just for the fun of it. And I don't even do YouTube anymore because like my full-time job is now like I'm a professional YouTuber, but I just do it for Michigan Dining instead of for myself. And so
Have you read have you read that book Flow by Mahaley?
no, I've heard people talk about it, but I haven't read it.
So there's a part in there where the challenge and the fun of what you do coincide, and that's
Hmm.
called the autotelic experience. It's essentially what they use in the gaming community to keep you hooked. It's
Yeah.
got to be challenging enough to make you engage, but it has to be fun so that you don't get
Hmm.
like, I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah.
Um, and that's also what they do in Vegas, by the way. And that's a big Facebook strategy and all the
Oh yeah,
social
all of
media.
them.
But that application comes from Mahaley's book, Operational Flow.
Hmm.
And a lot of these guys, a lot of these gaming architects and builders, they construct what they're doing around that. But he calls the autotelic experience. But
Right.
it's you should read it. It's a way to find happiness at work, but part of that involves like coming into terms with who you are as a person.
Yeah, it's all of that, right? And so I think for me, I just wasn't expecting that wasn't something I was expecting out of work, and not in a good way or bad way. Do you know what I mean? I, it was yeah, I just wasn't expecting to find joy in a job. It was because I kind of got into food service accidentally. uh, does that make sense? Or food management? I don't know. Um,
Dude, I got into finance accidentally. I know
right,
the journey. If it
right.
wasn't,
And like you had said earlier, like there's points you really enjoyed the work and you're good at it and you're able to see things, and that part is great. But I just, but it didn't feel like what I was meant to do, and I didn't know what I was meant to. Also, I don't know. It's interesting at 50 to be able to pivot. I wasn't expect. I think that's it. I was not expecting to be able to pivot professionally in my early 50s. And I was okay with that. So I was just going to pivot personally. You know what I mean? I didn't really have this desire to go off in another career direction either. I had played with that idea, and that idea didn't seem like it was going to work out. So I wanted to focus my energy on just, I want to become a YouTuber just for the hell of it. Because I started doing it with my son for video game stuff. And then he got older, and clearly, at some point he didn't want to keep making videos with his dad, but I just wanted to keep but I just wanted to keep making videos. So I just kept making videos. And now I get to do it for a living for, I don't know, at least another year or two, or hopefully forever. I'm sure it'll be forever. So
yeah. I mean, the fun is also not knowing what the outcomes are, right? Like
yeah.
you can spend your whole life trying to have a deterministic outcome about and be risk adverse, so that only one outcome is possible. Like,
Hmm.
but reality comes in, and that's not how things work, and you have to be okay with unknown outcomes.
Yeah.
Or you have to be able to say like, I'm resilient enough that if this isn't what's going to happen, then I'm going to pivot over here and do this. But like it could be for the rest of your life. But I think what I've learned over the last couple of years, you have to be okay saying
Yeah.
change happens,
Yeah.
and I have to be okay with change. And if I'm not, then it's one, it's going to feed my anxieties. But I'm always going to be sort of like have a defeatist attitude.
I want to change speed real quick because I have a story that I don't think you remember, but I'm dying to tell this story, and how I know for a fact that you're going to find your groove. The things that you think you're struggling with your sermon now and slowing down and all that stuff, you're going to find your groove. So you and I were friends in elementary school, and then after that, um, I spent many years in a Christian school from, I don't know, let's say fourth or fifth grade all the way up till eighth grade. And then I went to public school where we reconnected in ninth grade. So all the time in a small Baptist Christian school where there's a lot of talk about how horrible and evil public schools are. And then I have to go into this environment as a ninth grade, right? It was terrifying for me to go um, into ninth grade. And we had a class, I think it was Mr. Klomperns. It was a literature class in ninth grade. Um,
Yeah, yeah. We had speech with him, and yeah, we had speech class with him in ninth grade.
um,
Oh, no, no, that was when we were juniors. We had
no,
an
this
England. We did something
it
with
was
them. Yeah,
like an English lit class, right?
yeah, that's right.
And so one of the assignments, and the room was set up such as if I remember right, it's like a U shape, but there was two rows, so we're all kind of looking at each other, right? And mind you, I came from a Christian school with like four, I don't know, 20 people in my entire class to 400 freshmen, right? And one assignment was we had to memorize something from a book, like a paragraph, and then give this speech in class, right? So, and I think it was whatever book we were reading at the time. Uh, and so we had to memorize the paragraph and stand up and something that meant something to you. Um, so you have to understand, I'm terrified, right? I've never had to memorize anything where I already know what's going to happen. I'm going to forget it because I have to speak in front of people in a public school for literally the first time in my life. And I'm already terrified because I'm this little Christian kid in a high school, right? So, anyway, the day comes up that I have to do it. And you go before me, right? You happen to be the person that goes before me. And you stand up and I hadn't heard you speak, but your tone was different. You gave this beautiful, eloquent, emotional, pitch perfect. You weren't just reading something from memory. It was like you're in a play, and it was
Oh, it
beautiful.
was a play. It was a Shakespearean
It was
play, and
Shakespeare. We had to do something from Shakespeare. You
it
stand
was a
up.
soliloquy. It was a soliloquy.
There you
How
go. We had to
sweet
do
is
a
love
Shakespeare.
it's I remember it. How sweet is love itself possessed when love shadows are so rich.
Yeah, and then I get up after
Yeah,
you, and
yeah.
I forgot my entire thing, and I stumbled and stuttered, and I had no. I mean, I didn't even practice making it beautiful. I had tried to memorize it, and I just forgot half of it, and I just stood up, mumbled for a minute, and sat down, and felt horrible. And after you had done this amazing, you still remember it, right?
Oh yeah, 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 absolutely. Yeah, well, I think it was Romeo and Juliet, and
Yeah,
I
it
did this
was.
part where um, my bosom's lord sits lightly in his throne, and he was talking about his heart and how
Yeah,
talking about his love. I think for Juliet at the time,
yeah,
and then he says something. He goes in this, me, and he just how sweet is love
right,
itself possessed when love's shadows are so rich in joy. I mean, it's just beautiful, beautiful imagery. It's gorgeous.
right. And the problem here is, of course, at that point in my life, I just wasn't mature. I couldn't even make the connection to literature like that. You know what I mean? Like, I wasn't even emotionally mature enough to make a connection to literature like that. And then you stand up, and I was like, "Who's this godlike man?" I'm like, "Wait a minute, I know that guy."
What's funny about that is I really I memorized it and I practiced it quite a bit. But I remember afterwards he said something. He said, "I never would have thought you could have read it that well," and I was kind of it hurt my feelings.
Hmm.
Like it
They should have.
made me shut down.
Yeah.
Um, and but Eric Bernstein was in the class,
Hmm.
and he said the same. He came up to me afterwards. And was like, "Dude, you ruined it for me." I just remember, I remember Catherine Stamp, who was always dressed in it felt like some kind of designer clothing, and she was very pretty.
Yeah.
And
Oh
Dawn
yeah.
Sweeney was there; she was very pretty, and all these women and you're this hormonal ninth grader just trying to pull it together to do this thing,
Yes.
and so you feel like the beat of a thousand eyes on you. It's
Yes.
just really,
Right.
and for him to say that really threw me. It's like, oh god,
I know. But you did a
uh,
beautiful job. Everybody knew
thank
you
you.
did a beautiful job. Imagine following that and literally I forgot half the lines and I just stood up and I'm sure I got an F on it or whatever. I don't know. It looked as if I hadn't done a damn thing. So,
What's funny about that is I had a similar experience when I was in seminary. The guy who was a year older than me is Raphael Warnock, who is now the Senator Reverend Dr. Raphael Warnock from Georgia.
mhm,
So we used to live across the hall from each other, and he has been one who's been the most instrumental in teaching me how to become a better preacher, how to weave a story. And he's he was brilliant back then, and he's obviously his talent has even gotten even further. And he's very very spiritual and religious. Um, I had to do a. I had to. He asked me to do a to read the Bible passage before he preached one day in our chapel on campus. And so I did but it's almost like you're, this guy is a once in a lifetime speaker. And I mean that, I've seen him preach, probably close to 50 times. And every time I've come away in awe. like he's it's not just a gift. I mean, he really puts so much studying and effort and his heart into it. It's just so much a part of who he is. And then you have to go up there and read a Bible passage into it, and you're just like, you're sort of like, I don't know, it's it's very intimidating, even though he's an incredibly warm, nice guy. It's just, like you're in the presence of greatness when you're around
Right.
him. And I'm not saying that's how you felt back in ninth grade.
No,
I
but it'd
mean,
be like introducing Barack Obama before he's going to give one of his amazing oracle
yeah,
manif-
it's just like,
yeah.
people want you out of the way, like get out of the picture here. And it's very strange. So it was just, but that was, like I remember he did this wonderful sermon on, I think it was the Gospel of Mark, or it was either Mark or Matthew, about this guy wandering around the tombs, and I never thought of it the way he presented it. And he's so brilliant, and I was just like, God, that guy he was just one of the most brilliant sermons I've ever heard.
Mhm.
But then I heard another sermon, and that was the next brilliant one.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, but yeah, that was. I do remember that day very well because the follow up was really kind of traumatic on me. But then also my classmates kept saying things to me too, like, good job. And I've never gotten that kind of accolade before on anything academic that I did.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Obviously, I don't. It makes me very sad that you would get that kind of feedback. But from a fellow student perspective, it was just like, well, that guy is. Uh, it engendered a lot of respect in me for you. It wasn't one of those like, oh, I wasn't expecting that from that guy. I was just like, oh, this guy's kind of next level. So
Yeah, I mean, well, thank you. I'm not saying yeah in agreement. I'm saying yeah, like let's move on because I'm uncomfortable.
I gotcha.
Yeah, I think when I try to write sermons, I try to present a side of myself that I hope people can tap into that makes them feel like they can articulate things like this too. Like I want them to feel like they're artists. And then me as an artist, I want to make people see the world in a different way after I do a sermon or I write or preach.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I quote this a lot, but I always say Picasso once said, "Lie that leads us to the truth." I think sermons should do that. Sermons should be about exposing the lies that are all around us and lead you to a truth,
Mm-hmm.
not in the sort of like that Southern Baptist sense where it's very legalistic and
Yeah.
it's almost superstitious. If you do X, Y, and Z, you'll get this in this return. I like it in the sense that it makes you see the world in dynamic and refreshing way, and that's the fun for me and the challenge I have as a future minister.
Well, I watched your sermon on Pride Sunday, and of the many things I loved the hook in there where you talk about, and I think it's such an important one, where this isn't about um, accepting uh, people into your church. It's like you need to be ashamed that you didn't allow them to worship with you as an equal member for the last 100 years.
Look at sacred space and what it means. It's really dictated by
Yeah.
very masculine patriarchal architecture and designs.
Mhm.
You're elevated, the walls are kind of breathing down on you. It doesn't have this sense of inclusivity, and it's very male centric. Um, I think it suffocates me as a artist to be in that presence sometimes because I don't feel like the sense of wholeness with people in there. I feel like I'm going to be pounding down on them. And so the idea that we have to start presenting our sacred space with overlapping stories and narratives,
Mhm.
and that people have to relinquish control of their past narratives and myths that they use to build up the sacred space is critically important. And I would also, I don't like the idea of doing nominal affirmation. Like, oh yeah, we accept, the queer community.
Right.
But what does that mean? Are they fully integrated into what you're doing, or are you just saying this because you need the dollars that they have? You have to feel
Yeah.
the tithing. So for me, it's more than just that. It's actually seeing the struggles of the queer community. In particular, people who are non-binary, gender non-conforming, transgender. It's the way they see the world is critically important for us to understand how sacred space can become things for everybody. And I was talking to a friend of mine in New York who's Jewish. This is when I was visiting New York a couple weeks ago. And I was telling him, look, you should be able to walk into a Christian sanctuary and not feel threatened. You know,
Right.
you should be able to say, like, I'm safe here. If I have to go somewhere, I know I'm safe here. And
Right.
same for Sikhs, Buddhists, Muslims. But the reality is, we sort of been pushing this Christian exclusivity and chauvinism on people, and it's led to a lot of sort of cultural fascism that's wrapped up in a Christian cloak.
Mhm.
And it's become the predominant narrative actually out of Christianity that people think it's normal for a Christian to be exclusivist, to be a nationalist, to be, to be prejudiced. And I want to compete against that narrative and say, no, that's not actually what we are. And part of that is just revamping and understanding what space means, but also what does real inclusivity look like?
Yeah. And what does real faith look like? I don't know. I find faith to be an interesting um, term. I maybe we can save this conversation. We actually should have this conversation for an entire other podcast. But just because of my religious background, I grew up in a Baptist church and fundamentalist church, and I haven't attended church in that way since I was 18. So um, I have a lot of issues and thoughts surrounding that. But I always wonder about both the power and the vulnerability of faith, because I feel like faith is so easily manipulated. Um, like if you have a
And
strong,
misunderstood.
yeah, like I fear, like, see, and this I know is a bias in coming through this, and maybe some of my own experience, but I feel like somebody who has a deep faith in God, it can be is easily manipulated if they're not careful by a political force, by a media force, um, because you live so strongly in your faith. Does that make sense?
Well, I think there's a lot of manipulative people who go into religion and politics as a form of control and egotism. And yeah, I think you have to be really careful. This is something I guard against too, because as a minister, you can become a cult of personality, where it becomes more about you than the person, than the faith you represent. To me, faith is, it's a very term that gets abused, and it gets confused with belief. And faith and belief to me are different things. Faith to me is how you express your devotion to a transcendent being,
Mhm.
right? Like we all have some kind of faith in that way. Um, Belief is, how you sort of, it comes from the German word "believe," which means to grab hold of, to love, to me, belief is it's sort of like what you really do what you really do about your faith. Like it's this, like your creeds. I think today faith becomes more confessional to people, where they say, "I believe X, Y, and Z, and that makes me superior to you who don't believe this." That to me is the form of Christian chauvinism or religious, fundamentalism that I just is so unappealing and just disgusting to me. Um, and I don't have much use for confessional Christianity.
Mhm.
Like I confess my faith, I confess my sins. To me, it's kind of narcissistic and egotistical too. It's a quick way
Mhm.
out. I think it's important. If you are a Christian, the simple thing is you have to love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love humankind. That's the only commandment Jesus gave you to really be a follower of Jesus. In the strict, orthodox sense of it, you have to be someone who believes in the Trinitarian philosophy of, God is fully, God the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit,
Mhm.
and reconciling that um, Trinitarian concepts, to yourself, and that's not easy for a lot of people because it's not explained very well. Um, but this idea that faith is a legalistic thing, is if you do this, this, and this, that makes you what it is, and it becomes more and more exclusive and more restrictive about what faith. And I think that's really off-putting for a lot of people.
Mhm.
I tend to think, the faith isn't about what you confess. It's an ability and an action verb, right? Like it's what you do. Are you faithful because you confess it, or are you faithful because there's people who are are hurting and their clothes are torn apart and you're helping them?
Mhm.
People are hungry. People have unmet needs. That's faith. Respond to that. Faith isn't to me about I believe this, so I'm better than you. That's just there's nothing new about that out there in humankind. That's just straight out fascism.
Right. And yeah, it can rear itself. It can manifest itself anywhere as well. And but the opposite of that is like for instance, my father, who truly lives his faith, also, and so I don't agree with him politically or religiously, but I have never met a more godly man and a man that is more true to his faith than him, because he takes I've never he takes care of his community more than anybody I've ever known, and he does it with a purity of heart more than anybody I've ever known. And so when I want to think of an example of a beautiful representation of faith that may not align with me politically or religiously, but it aligns with my soul, I can look at my dad, because uh, he is the most amazing person I know, and it's he's the most genuine person I know as well. So I don't know. I just find this whole idea of faith versus blindly following really an interesting concept. And when you see somebody like my father who literally lives in his faith, it's not a facade. There's nothing outside of it. There's nothing inside of it. It's just his relationship with God dictates how he moves throughout the world. Um, and that's the difference between, in my mind, a person of faith versus a person that's religious.
Yeah, I would say to me that's different. He can have a confessional sense of Christianity that differs from his faith in action, right? Like confessionally and what you believe politically are two different things. Like I've met people who are very conservative who do more charitable work than the most progressive people I've ever met.
Oh yeah.
So which one matters more to me? Like the good words or the good deeds?
Hmm.
And I guess there's consequences for both, and there's unintended consequences for good intention
Right.
too.
Yeah. Yeah.
I haven't resolved that one, Mike. I really haven't.
Well, it's because it's about as great as it gets, right?
Yeah.
It's not a black and white subject at all.
Well, and the more depth I get into when I do theological stuff, the more I realize, we operate in the shadows. We don't operate in black and whites. The
Yeah.
reality is that life is complicated, and we have to stop trying to provide easy answers for these complicated issues.
Mhm. I agree. Hey, we're pushing 2 hours. You want to do this again?
I know, and I got chores to do. So
Yeah, we should do this again sometime.
Yeah, or just talk, Mike.
Yeah. Oh, we'll
I
talk
love you,
some
man. It's just
Yeah, we
I
should
miss
get
stuff
into
like
the
this.
story of our. We should have a funner conversation just about the story of our friendship, because it is interesting how long we've been friends.
It really is. It goes.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, I'm going to stop the recording and then I'll say goodbye to you for real. So until my
Um,
next
yeah.
podcast, we'll see you later.